Hello everyone, and welcome to our 9th day. Today we see how climate change is forcing changes for organizations in business or the public sector. In the introduction, Professor John Ehrenfeld questioned the relevance of the notion of sustainable development and sustainability. And in conclusion, Professor Robert Constanza introduces us to ecological economics. Between the two talks, Professors Lady Klotz, Manhana Milkoreit, and William Ruiz will explore new ways to plan, design, and govern the organization in the Anthropocene era. I now give the floor to Alexia in order to introduce Professor Ehrenfeld.
Bonjour, good morning. So I will be your host once again today. My name is Alexia Austerlang. If you haven't seen me the last 2 days, I'm a PhD student in psychiatric science and a science communicator. And today it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, our first speaker of the day. John Ehrenfeld retired in 2000 as the director of the MIT Program on Technology, Business and Environment. He retired again in June 2009 as executive director of the International Society for Industrial Ecology after guiding its development after the society was founded in 2000. He continues to be engaged in thinking, writing, and teaching about flourishing. He's author or co-author of over 200 publications, including the books The Right Way to Flourish, Reconnecting with the Real World from 2019, and Sustainability by Design, A Subversive Strategy for Transforming Our Consumer Culture from 2008. His work was rewarded many times. In 1999, the World Resources Institute honored him with its first Lifetime Achievement Award, and in 2009, the International Society for Industrial Ecology awarded him its Society Prize. The title of his talk today is Flourishing, Not Sustainability, is the Right Vision for the Future. We will be taking questions at the end of the talk, but if you want to write them in the chat throughout the talk, you're welcome to in French or English. We can translate, and we'll make sure to take note of them and keep them for the end. You'll also be able to raise your hand at the end during the Q&A session if you want to ask your question out loud. And as usual, if there's a major problem with Zoom, let's meet in GatherTown and hope that doesn't happen. Welcome, Professor Ehrenfeld. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Let's see, I'm going to begin with a slideshow presentation. I'm going to pretty much go right through that presentation as quickly as I can so we can have a conversation about it. But let's see if I can share my screen and go. I have to hit that. I think that's working. So that's the title of my talk. It's not exactly, I'd say the title is pretty close to what I want to talk about. So there we go. So let me give you my key arguments, and then hopefully I'll have grounded them in the rest of my talk. The climate change and other persistent threats are unintended consequences of living within the modern paradigm. That we're stuck there, like we're stuck in a whirlpool, an eddy. That these failures can be traced to a faulty model of the brain. This is a key point of my presentation, and it's a central part of the book, The Right Way to Flourish. Using a model that was developed by Brit Ian McGilchrist, I also argue that the two brain hemispheres attend to the world very differently. And that over time, particularly in modernity, the evolutionary balance, the right side dominance of the brain's hemispheres have shifted to favor the left side. So our left brain way of seeing the world is the problem. It underlies the creation of unintended consequences because it's incapable of seeing the world as it really is. Finally, adopting flourishing as the primary norm would drive us toward a sustainable planet because flourishing requires a balance of both hemispheres. In other words, flourishing would basically begin to drive us back from this left side dominance to the appropriate balance for the right hemisphere being the master. So that's the key arguments, and I'm going to go step by step and try to put some foundations under each point. So for those who are familiar with systems dynamics, here's a little systems dynamics exercise that argues that we try to fix everything, every problem with some form of technological or technocratic quick fix. These are based on some theory about the way the world works. And it turns out that those theories are held in our individual left brains and in a kind of metaphorical, cultural left brain. Sustainability, of which climate change is a part, inequality, so many other aspects of modern life, I just lump into the whole category of unsustainability and argue that unsustainability has been created by the failure to really understand the complex systems that are at play at the world, and we just can't act appropriately. Secondly, we're held from finding our way to the systemic solutions. This is certainly for those who are familiar with systems dynamics, this is a familiar diagram. It's called shifting the burden, or in the worst case, addiction, and that we are blinded by our fixation on these theoretical technological quick fixes and can't find our way to the bottom loop where the systemic solution lies. And so unsustainability is really the result of that loss of consciousness about the world in three key domains. One is how the world really works, and two, how humans really work, and three, the interconnectedness of human beings and the natural world. By the way, the background there on that slide is Biosphere 2. This was an attempt to build a sustainable world within an enclosed system, and it was an abject failure. We just don't know enough about this complexity of the world to do so. For the last 20 years or so, I've been working in and around the idea of sustainability, and starting with a pretty good technology after I was at MIT, a notion that we could solve these problems with technology. I've come to believe that we can't. One, it isn't working, but two, sustainability without some critical thinking is not the way to go. One, the language is in the way. Sustainability is an empty word. It's devoid of meaning without some reference to something to sustain. You just can't be sustainable in the general case. You need to know what you're trying to sustain. And in this world, the implicit reference of sustainability is growth, economic growth. And this is a remnant of the original Brundtland report that defines sustainable development. Both corporate and political programs, with few exceptions, are almost all designed to maintain some form of economic growth. But that is the problem. I'm sure you've seen already, and I don't need to go repeat this, we're overstressing the planet. Bill Rees, I think, has been one of the speakers. His work on footprinting has been really critical to show that we've already outgrown the ability of the planet to support what we would call a sustainable world. So we need a new kind of vision. We need something other than sustainability. We need something other than our norms that will push us into a future that we're happy with. So it's that paradigm. It's the modern paradigm. It's the paradigm that has arisen over the last 500 years. It's that idea of how the mind works. It's the way that we think the world is a machine. And it's the paradigm itself that's keeping us locked into the way we see the world and then that we try to cope with. That's both creating and exacerbating the essential threats like climate change. So this trap is primarily, this is the argument I want to make, is our now very well-established model of the mind and its role in who we are and how we act and how we see the world. We can go back and thank Descartes and many others for that model. It's created the wonders of modernity, but at the same time, it's created these unintended consequences that now we need to deal with. But I believe that help's on the way, that there is a new model about how the brain works and how it comes to create these issues and what we need to do to restore the more appropriate balance of these two hemispheres. So I'm going to take a few minutes and go through that model of the brain. So I have a little video I want you to watch. You may have seen, some of you may have seen this before, but it's a good exercise in arguing that the brain works in ways that our normal way of thinking doesn't allow us to see.
This is the hollow head. Actually, at the moment, it's a perfectly normal head of Charlie Chaplin, but wait, as it comes round, you'll see, or will you, that it's hollow. The back of it, coming around now, is actually a hollow mask. It appears to rotate in the opposite direction, and amazingly, the nose sticks out, although it's actually sticking in. Coming round now is the normal, correct, as it were, face, and wait again as it comes round, and you'll see this extraordinary thing like Jekyll and Hyde. Both the noses stick out because it's so unlikely that a nose sticks in that a face is hollow. So you see it as convex, although it's in fact concave, as now, and then it'll become the normal face again, there. And note that as soon as the features appear in the hollow inside, it will look convex, as though it's a normal face almost, though it isn't. As soon as the features appear, there, your brain refuses to see it as hollow simply because it is so unlikely. And this demonstrates the immense power of top-down knowledge, which will actually counter signals bottom up from the senses and force an extraordinary illusion in which the sensory information of the present is cancelled by immense knowledge derived from the past, because you've seen so many faces, all with their noses sticking out. So it's just impossible to see that as correctly hollow.
So I got this video some years ago, a long time before I had come across the model of Iain McGilchrist. And so whoever was narrating that model was using his own language. But essentially, he was describing exactly what McGilchrist argues is the way the brain works. It explains this. He doesn't talk about top-down, and it's really that it's the left brain that's simply disallowing, not allowing what the right brain sees to present itself to our consciousness. So I'm going to quickly go through that model, and I'm sorry it's a big story, but I have only a few minutes, and I'm going to go very quickly through McGilchrist's model. His model is basically what McGilchrist says, and here's a key quote from his book. McGilchrist says, we bring about a world in consciousness that is partly what is given, that means out there, and partly what we bring. Something, a world that then comes into being through this particular conjunction and no other. And the key to this is the kind of attention we pay to the world. Now, what he's meaning is that each of the two hemispheres pays attention to the world differently. Here's the crux of his model. It's a tome, it's a book about 3 inches thick with maybe 5,000 citations. But I believe that these 3 points really capture his model pretty much in its entirety. McGilchrist says that each hemisphere of the brain pays attention to the outside world differently, and thus presents a different world to us, and thus empowers a different kind of actor. My metaphor is we're sort of like a set of fraternal twins, but trapped in a single body. And further, that our individual characters and that of the current culture depend on which of the two hemispheres is the dominant. So here is the first part of this, that each of the brain hemispheres attends to the world differently. It presents a very different world to us. The left is focused, it's rigid, it's self-contained, and it kind of grasps, holds on. Whereas the right is broad, flexible, persistent, vigilant, and alert. McGilchrist argues, as do others. So he doesn't claim to have originated all these thoughts, but he's a genius at capturing them and putting together in a meaningful way. That the brain is an evolutionary development, and the left developed differently because living organisms need to be able to focus. They need to be able to, say, a bird needs to be able to pick out a seed from soil particles. And it needs that focus in order to be able to perform. But it also needs to be vigilant. It has to watch out for its prey. It has to be alert for whatever is going on around it. That we need both of those capabilities simultaneously. And that the only way that could happen was that the left and right brains developed to provide different kind of ways of seeing the world. And this is true in many, many other species are similar to human beings, although their brains are less complex, but the left and the right serve these two different functions. So let's look at the left brain. So what's the world that the left brain gives us to understand and act within? One, it represents the past. We'll see that the left brain is disconnected from the outside world. That's pretty much what that Chaplin mask exercise shows. That the left brain thinks that noses stick out. It's learned that over the past, and it simply ignores the signals that are coming in from the right. Its world is basically meaningless, it's lifeless, it's closed, it's mechanistic. The left brain deals with predictability, and the parts of that world are decontextualized. They stand alone, they are abstract. They have explicit properties. They're disembodied. They're not connected. They're generalized. And we'll see now that the right brain presents a very different kind of world to us. It's a world that is now. The right brain connects us to the world of now. It's the world through which we looked at the Chaplin mask, but the left brain then took over. It's meaningful, it's new, living, open, organic, contextual. It's the brain of it that gives us the whatever is going on around us in its full capacity. And the parts are seen as interconnected. They're embedded in the context. They have implicit meaning. They're instantiated and particular. So if I see a face, someone standing before me, the right brain sees them as Joe or Mary or my wife. But the left brain just sees them as a person without that individuality. And that has an immense consequence in terms of how we behave. So flourishing, which I'll define in a minute, is possible only when the right brain hemisphere is the master, but it's always balanced with the left. Both sides are always involved. And McGilchrist argues persuasively that the evolutionary mastery of the right brain has undergone change over time. And it's shifted from its mastery to the left and back to the right. But since modernity and our exercise and our literacy and our use of science, which are all left brains, that it's disappeared as the dominant master. And we live in basically a left brain controlled world. So, two worlds, two kind of actors. The left brain, the actor that's associated with the left brain, is disconnected from the outside world. Very key point. And without the ability to abstract from experience, it's a powerful plus. We could not have constructed and organized all the things that have allowed us to design the modern world, all the technological and institutional structures on which our civilizations have been built. So we wouldn't have gotten here without that strength, dominance of the left brain. But the left brain is incapable of apprehending the outcomes from its actions directly. And that's really the cause of unintended consequence. It doesn't see what the outcomes are. So if over time some first subtle unintended consequence like climate change is occurring, it doesn't get fed back to the left brain. So the ability to correct and adjust is missing when the left brain is the master. The right brain, the actor associated with the right brain, is connected to the outside world in a real-time sense. And without that opening to the moment, we could not have taken care over time of the immediate, non-routine needs of ourselves, others, and the rest of the world. We would be very smart animals, but a key part of what makes us humans would also be missing. So each hemisphere creates a distinctive kind of actor. The left is the one that we really know about. We think that's where we are. We're rational, we're Smithian, we're self-interested. Heidegger and the existentialists call the left actions either inauthentic or undifferentiated. It's controlling, instrumental, doesn't like uncertainty. It's all about knowing the facts, analytic, reductionist, individualistic, self-interest is the word. And it's the side of the brain where anger and negative emotions generally lie. The right's very different. It's connected. So it takes care of. It's a caring. It's, again, going back to the existentialists. It's really the basis of Martin Heidegger's being in the world. It's all about caring. I even, in my book, give it a name, homo curitans, from the Latin word to care, to differentiate from the Smithian model that drives modern economics and almost all political economies. It's authentic, again, in Heidegger's word. It's creative. It's fine with possibility. It's where understanding that implicitness comes from. It's more pragmatic. It's the social side of human nature, if you want to use that kind of metaphor, empathetic, and it's the site of our positive emotions. Now, these couldn't be any more different. And it is that, and how we are, how society follows its beliefs in how we are depends on which one of the two is the dominant one. So we've been stuck in a left brain world. I've said this, I think it's really important to keep repeating this. This is just another variation of that systems dynamics archetype, where we do everything, we solve every problem or attempt to solve every problem by using our left brain, and we get these unintended consequences. Now we need to change. We have to get to the bottom. We have to get to the ability to get into that lower loop where we are accessing a more accurate, more real model of the world, including human beings. And to do that, we also need a new normative vision that can literally pull us out of that upper loop where we fail all the time. It's called fixes that fail, and bring us to the bottom loop of success. Now, I think that flourishing is exactly that vision. And I hope to make my point in the next few slides. Flourishing is intrinsic to life. It captures the images and expectations. Just look at this image of those seeking to preserve and heal the planet and its inhabitants. It arises from the purposefulness of life. Life has a purpose to us. It's an emergent property of the cosmos. It's also a miracle, which the philosopher Loyal Rue, who I refer to later, also talked about any event, the occurrence of which is so radically impossible as to be completely unbelievable. So life happened. We still don't know exactly what went on in the 4.5 billion years that planet Earth exists to bring forth life itself. And living is a process of constant conservation or self-reproduction. The late Chilean philosopher Humberto Maturana, whom some of you may know, coined the word called autopoiesis to define this notion that organisms continually reproduce themselves. Rue calls it viability. In the more general philosophic terms, we can say that living has a directionality or a teleology to it. So flourishing is the sort of getting to the end of that teleology. It's the realization of an organism's potential. Now, non-human organisms' potential is determined solely by their genes, but we're different. Our potential is determined by both a combination of both our genes, but the ways in which we interact, we apprehend, interact with the actual world. So importantly, that existential potential has two dimensions. It relates to the actual experience of living. And following Rue, I have divided our existential potential into two parts, and I'll define them in just a minute: personal wholeness and social coherence. Personal wholeness. Personal wholeness is a measure of the fullness of the expression of one's unique historical self as exhibited in action. It entails what, again, the existentialists call authentic. These are actions that you might say are owned by the actor. I claim them as mine. They come from whoever I am. Of course, they're incorporate things I've learned, but they're basically actions that I can say are entirely mine. And personal wholeness arises largely from actions largely orchestrated by the right brain. So here we're getting back to a connection between this idea of flourishing and this bihemispheric model of the brain. Social coherence is an aspect that arises from our inherent social ability. Human species is among a very few species that are E.O. Wilson defined as eusocial, prosocial, social beyond sort of casualness. It comes out of the way in which we coexist within these a myriad of institutions that constitute modern societies. And it involves actions that have been shaped by past experience within these settings. The action is undifferentiated. There's no explicit ownership of really doing whatever is the norm. And not surprising in this model, social coherence arises from actions largely orchestrated by the left brain. So we have an idea of flourishing with two dimensions, one attached to the right brain and one attached to the left brain. Now, if we're going to flourish, we need to satisfy all three dimensions: that biological potential, the full expression of one's genes. So people that are malnourished, who do not have the ability to see their biological potential are not going to flourish. The existential potential, we need both sides to be fully expressed in order to flourish. And last, I'll just make the point that flourishing is an existential quality. It's about the way we are living. It is fundamentally different from psychological states like happiness. I make that point because flourishing has been defined in many surroundings, from philosophy to psychology, but it's almost always defined as some kind of a state, a flow of happiness. But very importantly, the way I've been talking about flourishing, it is an existential quality. It shows up in living itself. So quickly, these are some of the properties that come forth when you're flourishing. Peaceful sense of self, belonging. Connectedness is a very key part of flourishing. When you're flourishing, you feel connected to the world around you. You're taking care of it. And on a cultural level, aspects like justice, fairness, equity, and even freedom itself are in my model an indicator that it's a flourishing world. So it has the power to create a right brain future. We need something, as I said, to take us out of this current reality, to bring us into a vision of the future. Almost all models of transformation require some vision of the future, to allow us to break down our view of the present, to reflect, to think critically, and to be able to replace the mental models that have been keeping us locked in a place we don't want to be. Flourishing is that vision. I am convinced that as we begin to use it to design our institutions, to design our businesses, design our policies, and that's really the connection to this workshop. This is all about changing. And I've been arguing that adopting both the vision of flourishing that I've described and McGilchrist's divided brain model, this can be the sort of the model to design a world that doesn't have global warming, that has flourishing, that minimizes so many of the social bads that have evolved unintentionally over many years, many decades. So how do we get there? Well, it's really a two-way street. Personal wholeness requires a re-engagement of the right hemisphere. You've got to recover and empower the authentic actor. But social coherence requires refilling the left brain with new ideas and beliefs that will enable us to redesign, reconstruct, and operate institutions that care, that are effective in dealing with all of the problems that crop up. So we need to go from what have become misleading models, paradigmatic models of the universe as a big machine, and the Smithian economic model as the human as a self-interested body of insatiable needs, to one where reality is composed of a complex world, a world that the right sees, a world that's interconnected, a world where context is critical to provide meaning, and to the caring human being, again, that the phenomenologist Heidegger and his followers saw as caring. That will change the way that we behave and hopefully minimize the evolution and appearance and emergence of these unintended consequences. So one, we can try to rebuild that right hemisphere's metaphorical muscle by just directly acting. Pragmatism is a right brain phenomenon, reflective practice, things like mindfulness, which is becoming more and more popular, but it's not just a fad in my mind. It's very important because mindfulness really directly develops the ability of the right brain and can make it, sort of put it on the path to mastery. Empathy can be learned, and academic programs can be redesigned to focus on flourishing instead of the conventional norms like happiness or GDP or wealth or others. Building personal wholeness is to express life through authentic caring, and that is to act from the metaphorical heart or from one's calling, or mundanely, as I've been talking about in the context of McGilchrist's brain model, it's driven by that right hemisphere. So in my books, going back to Sustainability by Design, and even more recently in the book, The Right Way to Flourish, I've provided a schema. It's derived phenomenologically and points out a series of domains that, so it's like a to-do list for caring. And that if you keep this list in mind and focus on all of these dimensions, you are going to develop personal wholeness. So if you begin to take care of family, And there's these are not just casual categories. If you think about it, that the world outside, there's only yourself, other humans, and everything else. Those are the first three categories. But we do experience things that are outside of this world, transcendent. And there's these two categories of aesthetics, of our creativity and our spirituality. So if you take this as a to-do list and make sure that you are in fact taking care in your own way, there's no magic about which ones are the most important, but more or less of everything, over time, that personal wholeness is just simply going to develop. The right brain just develops in the act of caring for all of these categories. So they're the basis for, as I say, the development of some kind of flourishing practices. So this is really the last slide, and I'm just going to summarize. So I do believe that nothing short of a paradigm shift can produce a flourishing world. We can't get out of the straits we're in without a new paradigm. And that new paradigm is the divided brain model. We have to stop trying to fix modernity's world. Fixing is what the left brain does. So we have to start using the right brain to get out of our blindness. After that, we need to rebalance the hemispheres to return the right side to its position of mastery. And that will reconnect us to a world that really needs our care. We've made the mess. The Anthropocene is an indicator that we own whatever is happening out there, and we need to take care of it. And we need to reconnect to that world. Like the Chaplin mask, we can't see the world when our left brain is in charge. We can only see the world that's already in its head. Next, use flourishing as the primary normative aid and when we design our institutions. That will drive us toward a right brain mastery. Follow pragmatic, be a pragmatist. Follow pragmatic clues to get to the sources of problems. But we need to re-empower the left brain. We need new mental models if we're going to deal with the real sources of threats to the planet. And having done all of that, we need to be very patient because changes take a long time. We have to be patient in the way we observe and pragmatically, continually adjust. And finally, we need to recognize and celebrate our successes. So here's my 9-step, could be 8, could be 10, but here's my 9-step recipe for accomplishing what this entire summer school has been directed toward. I do believe it is important. I really am a skeptic about trying to do things within the current paradigm. So I leave you with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ehrenfeld.